Hello and welcome, and my regular viewers will know that a while back I did my top 10 Spectrum games, and what I'm going to do now is another series of videos, each of which will be 10 games, doing my games from 100 to 11. So once they are combined with my existing top 10, that will make my top 100 ZX Spectrum games. Depending on reception to this video and how people are liking the series of videos as they go on, I might also at the end of that tack on an honourable mentions section which will have some games that I didn't include and maybe discuss some of the games that people will undoubtedly say, why isn't X, Y or Z game in your list? My number 100 game is Slapfight. The strange thing is, I'm sure I'm going to say this might be a controversial choice a few times in this list, but I didn't expect to be saying it for the first game. Having looked a little around the internet and done a bit of research into this game, it seems that there are a few people who don't like it and don't think it's a particularly good game, whereas back in the day, I absolutely loved it. I'm not a big fan of shoot 'em ups. I do find an occasional one now and then that I really like, and I find that I play again and again and again and have a good session where I'm really trying to master it, and I'll play it quite a few times and eventually I'll give up, and I never get particularly far. I'm not one of these people who can go with one coin all the way to the end of R-Type or something like that, which I know there are some absolutely amazing players who can do things like that. But every now and then one comes along that I really enjoy, and Slapfight was one of those. The real thing I enjoyed about Slapfight is the way in which you get power-ups, because during the game you collect stars and they go towards extra power-ups, and the more stars you collect the better power-ups you can get, and it's a kind of risk versus reward mechanic in that you can think, I tell you what I'm going to do, I'm going to collect loads of stars and get some of the better power-ups. I absolutely loved getting the homing missiles, I always thought that was great. But to get the homing missiles, you've got to bypass a lot of other really good power-ups and hope that while you're waiting for that power-up you don't get killed, because if you get killed your power-up level goes back to 0. A bit of trivia about the game: it was released in 1987, it was published by Imagine Software, so by 1987 the Imagine label, as a lot of people will know, was being used by Ocean Software as a secondary label that they published a few games under. I think in general this game receives quite a bit of criticism because the bullets are hard to see. It's monochrome, which doesn't help to begin with, and the bullets are pretty small and can move quite quickly. And I think that's all there really is to say about this game. It's a really good game. I really enjoyed it. I'm not a shoot 'em up fan, and I'm sure people will argue that there are better shoot 'em ups that should have been on this list that I haven't put on. But for me, it is a really good game and I enjoyed it. I spent a lot of time playing it. One of the deciding factors that I used to consider whether a game was on the list or not is how long I've been playing it, and I played this for quite a long time. It's probably the shoot 'em up I spent most time playing on the Spectrum. I'll change that slightly and say it's probably the vertical shoot 'em up I spent most time playing on this Spectrum. Of course, there's always Jetpack, which is a terrific shoot 'em up but not a vertical shoot 'em. Anyway, that was Slapfight, my number 100. 99 is Hypersports. Hypersports is what I describe as a joystick waggler. That is a game where to achieve anything you quite often have to waggle the joystick from side to side really vigorously in a manner that could be quite embarrassing if someone walked into your bedroom while you were doing that hunched over. Or was that just me? In the arcade, Hypersports was the follow-up to the game Track and Field by Konami. Both games were by Konami. And Track and Field had been immensely popular, and what Konami did with Hypersports was vary what you did. So Track and Field, there is a lot of joystick waggling or button bashing to get your sprite to move forward. In Hypersports, it varies it up a bit. There are 6 events in Hypersports: swimming, ski shooting, the vault, archery, triple jump and weightlifting. In swimming, you waggle your joystick from side to side and press the fire button when the breathe command comes up, making sure that your swimming breathes. If he doesn't, he gets a big pause. If you breathe too early, he'll also pause and lose you time. The The technique for swimming reminds me a little bit of the high hurdles in Daley Thompson's decathlon, in that you have to waggle a joystick and then time your joystick button presses at just the right time to avoid taking a slow down or a time penalty. In the shooting event, clear pigeons will appear from either the right or left hand side of the screen, and you've got to press right or left at just the right time so that you hit them. You have targets that move up and down with the right level, but you've got a time when you hit the shot. I really enjoy the clear pigeon shooting part of the game. It's really good, and if you can get a perfect round, if you get everything, there's a huge big duck flies across the screen right at the end, and hitting that gives you a huge big bonus. Next comes the long horse, and that's extremely difficult. I really find the long horse hard. You've got to start your run up to the horse by pressing left and right, and then when you hit the springboard, time the jump just right, then time the release from the horse just right, and then waggle a joystick like mad again to do somersaults and get your sprite into just the right position to do a good landing. Now, this is quite often where I come unstuck in the game. It's really difficult, the long horse, and if it wasn't for the clear pigeon shooting being the event before this that I really enjoyed, I think I wouldn't have liked this game at all. If long horse had been second, then I wouldn't have played this game and I wouldn't like it. But it's not, it's third, and it does give you a bit of a challenge to get past, but every single event is a bit of a challenge. This seems slightly unfairly hard, and it's probably why it's much lower down in the list than some other games that some people might not think are as good, but I'm going to rate above this game, and I think it's basically this one event really put me off the game. Next comes the archery event, and in the archery event you have a target that moves across the play screen from top to bottom, and you've got to time the release of your arrow right so that you hit the target, and also then get the elevation right so you get near the middle of the target. After the long horse, this event actually seems pretty easy. I really like this one. I tend not to get a qualification on the first go, but you get 2 goes, and the first go is kind of getting your eye in and just working out when the right time to release the arrow is and how long to keep the fire button down, and then the second go you can pretty much get a really good score and qualify. Next is the triple jump, and for the triple jump you can kind of think of it like the long jump in Daley Thompson's decathlon, but with an extra 2 jumps added on the end. So you waggle your joystick to get up some speed and then do your first jump, and every time you jump you have to keep your finger on the fire button to get your angle right. And as usual in these events, you're aiming for a 45-degree angle to get maximum distance. Lastly is the weightlifting, and the funny thing is, when it comes to the weightlifting, I always just feel like I'm doing something wrong, because it feels like you have to waggle your joystick left and right until your arm starts to go into nuclear meltdown. Even on the lowest weight, it seems like you have to put a huge amount of effort to actually get the bar above your head. What of course happens is that after a lot of waggling, your sprite starts to flash and you press the fire button then to, I guess it's a kind of clean and jerk, so you jerk the bar above your head and hold it there and keep waggling the joystick to hold it there until you get the thumbs up from all 3 judges. So as you might have guessed, I like this game. I like all of the events. The swimming's good fun, not too hard. The ski shooting or clear pigeon shooting I really like. The vault I don't like, I've already said that. The archery I really like. Triple jump's okay. I mean, triple jump is pretty basic, and you can get similar events in lots of other joystick wagglers. And the weightlifting, again, I don't like, and I think the combination of the vault and the weightlifting is what has actually stopped this game from being higher up the list for me. So that's my number 99 game, Hypersports. My number 98 game is World Series Baseball. And the first thing I'm going to say about this game is I really like the loading screen on this game. It looked really good. There were some really amazing loading screens for the Spectrum. I think the first really good loading screen had to be Jetpack, which is a terrific loading screen. I still like it even now. But I just think this has a really good loading screen. I like the Imagine logo. I love the fact that it's got the American flag. I don't think there's many things more American than baseball. Perhaps Mom's apple pie on Sunday. Then there's the the cheerleaders in the background on the Star-Spangled Banner, and the baseball player at the front of the screen. He looks really, really good. And it's one of those screens where there's a little bit of colour clash, but the artist has managed to keep it to a minimum. This is another Imagine/Ocean game, i.e. a game that was released by Ocean under the Imagine label. And I remember buying this game off the strength of the review in Crash. Crash gave this game a really, really good review. It got 91%, and for those of you who know Crash, you'll know that that meant it was a Crash smash, although only just. So for anyone who's English and unfamiliar with baseball, then basically it's just a game of rounders, but you're allowed to hold the bat with two hands, and it's a bit bigger than a rounders bat. And of course it's played professionally, not just as a game that school children play. Kind of like rounders, but a bit more serious. So another thing I really like about this game is the layout of the screen. When you see the main screen and start to play, at the top there's a kind of billboard, a large screen that zooms in on the action, and that is where you see the picture, and it follows the ball to the batter, and as the ball travels towards your batsman, it's that helps you time the swing. And so you can swing the bat, and sometimes you miss, sometimes you'll connect and just get a little dink, sometimes you'll connect and get a really good hit. I remember when I was young being able to get a home run about every 5 or so swings. These days, no matter how hard I try, I can't get a home run. And as you bat and as you connect with the ball, your players run round the diamond, and if they can get all the way round the baseball diamond and back to the start, then they get 1 run. If you hit a home run, everyone who's on every single base, so everyone who's on the bay, runs all the way around the diamond, and you get a run for every single player that's on the diamond. And the bases being stacked, that phrase comes from baseball, meaning that you have a player on every single point on the diamond, and if at that point you hit a home run, that's going to give you 4, because there's 3 players out on the diamond and your batter, and they all just jog round and get a home run, and the crowd go wild, and it's what you really aim for to build a really high score in baseball. After batting, you have to field, and there are 3 ways you can get your opposition out. You can strike him out. That happens when the batsman fails to hit the ball 3 times in a row, or if he hits the ball and it doesn't go forward, it doesn't go into the main playing field, that's a foul, and that counts as a strike as well. And of course that's where another saying comes from: 3 strikes and you are out. The other way to get a batsman out is if you just catch the ball, similar to cricket. So if the batsman hits the ball and it goes straight to one of your players and he's able to catch the ball, then he's out. And lastly, you can stump them out. So again, it's the same in rounders. If your player holds the ball and is on top of the bay, and I think you've got to tag the player with the ball in real baseball or something like that, but if you have the ball and the player's between the bays, then you can tag him out, and you can get him out that way. And there is a way in this game where when you're fielding, after the batsman's hit the ball, when it goes to your fielders, you can actually just keep passing it around them, and the players will run between the bays. Sometimes the opposition players will run between the bays, well, when it's the computer, and you can actually use that to tag him with the ball and get him out. I used to be able to do that every single time. I just used to let the batsman go to the first bay and then pass the ball around, and would be able to get him out as he tried to steal bays, as they call it in baseball. Again, I can't for the life of me figure out how to do that now. When I was a kid and I played this game, and I used to play it a lot, I used to be able to do that every time. It became a bit boring and easy. In fact, it was why I stopped playing it. I used to get huge scores when I batted, and be able to get the computer out every single time when he was batting. So I basically had nothing left to achieve in the game. I'd mastered it. But it's a really good little game. There's not a huge amount to it, and it was never going to be my number 1 or number 2 game. I don't think it would really be anyone's number 1 or number 2 game unless they'd only played 1 or 2 games on the Spectrum, and this was one of them. Judging by how often copies of the game come up on eBay, I'm pretty sure it's sold a huge number. It must have done, because there always seems to be 1 or 2 copies there on eBay ready to be snapped up. As with every single one of the 100 games that are going to be in this series, I'd encourage people to go and play this. It's a good game just to pick up and have a bit of fun with. You can get into it quite quickly. It takes a bit of time to master it, but it isn't so hard that it's impossible to master. So that's my number 98 World Series Baseball. My number 97 game is The Lord of the Rings by Melbourne House. As I've grown older, I've come to realise that sometimes some things that you have nostalgia for are best left in the past. You don't want to revisit them because when you do, you'll just find out they aren't quite as good as you thought they were. A few years ago, I bought a record player. And I went back to my mum's house and took out all my old records, singles and LPs, went back home and started to play them. And some were great, some I really enjoyed, and some weren't so good. T'Pow, Bridge of Spies. I used to love that album when I was a kid. I thought it was absolutely excellent. I was a big fan of Heart and Soul, and I was also a huge big fan of China in Your Hand. Now, China in Your Hand isn't bad, actually. Heart and Soul isn't quite as good as I remembered it, and the rest of the album I really didn't like. I have to admit, I think then I put on Curiosity Killed the Cat, another album that I used to play a lot and actually used to like, and that wasn't as good either. Luckily, I was then saved because I had Peter Gabriel's So, which is a fantastic album, and The Christians by The Christians, which is another absolutely wonderful album, and that actually I played a lot. It's got a scratch on it, and I still love it, and I still like playing it. It's a really good album. But anyway, I've digressed. So, unfortunately, when I've gone back to playing Lord of the Rings, it has more been Bridge of Spies than The Christians. Now, I don't like to be negative, and I don't really like to say bad things about any of the games that I put in this list. This is my top 100, so I actually do appreciate these games. And I do have that nostalgia for this game. I did play it a lot as a kid, and I got a lot further than I can do now. But if I'm going to say things positive, again, it's got a good loading screen. And when you start off, the Black Riders, they're really menacing. I can imagine actually if I played this game a lot, I'd probably end up having nightmares about the Black Riders. But I did really like this game back in the day, and I played it a lot, and like I say, I could get a lot further than I can do now. Anyway, that is my number 97 game, Lord of the Rings. My number 96 game is Nightmare. Now, I'm going to admit that I was not a fan of the Nightmare TV show that this game is based upon. It could have been the age I was at the time when I was growing out of certain things that I liked when I was younger, but it always seemed a bit juvenile to me. The puzzles seemed a bit easy, and I don't know, the Helmet of Truth or whatever it's called, it basically meant the person walking around couldn't see anything. That kind of tried to add a bit of reality to what was going on, just seemed a bit of a gimmick. But this game came out in 1987, and that summer my friend bought it, and we spent hours and hours trying to puzzle through the game. Now, I remember our progress being painfully slow. Every time we got another step further in the game, we would feel a huge, big sense of achievement, probably bigger than the sense of achievement you get through working through puzzles in games these days. But for that one summer, we just persevered with the game and kept going at the puzzles. We never finished it, by the way. We drew a map, we would get so far, there were loads of notes in pencils all over the map to remind us what to do when we got to certain points in the game. But we really enjoyed it. It was, in a strange way, a really good multiplayer game, and me and my friend, and I think one or two of our other friends, we would sit for hours puzzling over this. How do you do this? What do you need to do? What do you need to get? How do you get past this certain part of the game? And going back to it now, I can't remember anything about it. And in these days, people would probably rush through the game a lot quicker because you could just go and look on YouTube and find a walkthrough where someone would tell you what to do. They'd show you what to do. They'd say, yeah, you do this, you do that. Oh, this thing took me a little while to puzzle out. Around here, you have to do X, Y, and Z. And I must admit, going back to the game now, I could remember how to do absolutely nothing. One other thing that strikes me going back to the game now is that the control mechanism is really cumbersome. The way you input commands is, well, it's just difficult. It's just painful, actually, sometimes. And I remember us commenting that and talking about it back in the day and saying, oh yeah, you need to do this, remember. And part of the skill of playing the game was overcoming that cumbersome input mechanism, because really this was an adventure game where you use keywords and you cycle through keywords to input commands into the game. And Strange enough, the previous game to this was a text adventure, and you couldn't type things in directly, but because you used those keywords, it was almost a skill involved in being able to cycle through them and know which one came next and do that. Once you got to know it, I seem to remember it wasn't too bad, but going back now, it doesn't spoil the game. I just remember that if you want to play it, you need to overcome this. I'm sure there will be walkthroughs of this game on YouTube somewhere, and someone has gone all the way through the game and completed it, and you can probably go to Tip Shop and download a map as well, and that'll help you. That's my number 96 game, Nightmare. My number 95 game is The Pyramid by Fantasy Software. Now, this is a game that stars Ziggy, and this is the first game that starred Fantasy Software's hero called Ziggy. The other two being Doomsday Castle and Backpacker's Guide to the Universe Part 1. Now, my cousin had this game, and I remember we used to go around to his house and load this up and play it. And there is something really compulsive about this game. It is a really, really simple shoot 'em up. Now, the backstory to this game borrows incredibly heavily from Douglas Adams. So Ziggy is searching for the ultimate question to life, the universe, and everything. Everybody knows, of course, that the answer to that ultimate question is 42, but without the question itself, it isn't really much use. The story then goes on to say something like 1,500 software houses somehow managed to develop this game simultaneously, and on some particular planet people were jumping up and down with craze at the game and destroyed the planet and blah blah blah. It's really nuts and quite Douglas Adams like. Ziggy's quite a good character as well. He's a small stick-like man who's encased in his bubble that he can fly around and he can shoot out of that. He has a kind of laser beam weapon that he shoots out of that, and he can use that to destroy aliens. Start the game at the top of the pyramid, and what you have to do is shoot aliens until a crystal drops from the top of the room. You then wait until the crystal turns blue, collect it, and you have to then drop it onto one of the exits at the bottom of the room until that exit opens. Playing the game now, it appears that the further down the pyramid you get, the more crystals that you need to open the exit. The other thing that happens as you go further down the pyramid is the movement patterns of the aliens get more complex, making it more and more difficult to get through the room. Because each room has two exits and the rooms are stacked brick-like, overlapping each other, as you go through the game and take different exits, you'll have a different game each time, in that you'll probably fight a different succession of aliens each time. For a game that came out in 1983, this is incredibly well animated. There's very, very little flicker. Probably the only thing that I don't think is that well animated is your laser. It's kind of just a succession of dots that appears. I mean, one of the interesting things is that in sci-fi movies and things like that, laser beams are always criticised for the fact that A, you can see them, and B, that they take time to travel. Of course, in reality, a laser beam will appear to be completely instantaneous, and in space I don't think you could actually see a laser unless it hits something, which I guess, using a bit of artistic license and bending your imagination around it, you could say, well, that's what this laser beam is representing. But still, given that everything else was so beautifully animated in the game, I think it's a pity that there was just a little bit of lack of attention paid to the laser beam. But I've probably dwelled on that too much, because honestly, the graphics are really good. The aliens are all pretty simplistic, but as I say, there's very little flicker and the aliens move really, really smoothly. If you compare it to, say, Arcadia by Imagine, that came out at a similar time, that graphics in that flicker terribly, and it was seen to be a really, really good shoot 'em up because it was one of the few on the market at the time, and this game just beats it hands down, certainly when it comes to smoothness of animation of the characters. So that's my number 95 game, The Pyramid. My number 94 game is Spy Hunter. Spy Hunter was released in 1995 by US Gold and is of course a conversion of the arcade game of the same name. One of the really good things about that arcade game is that the Spy Hunter arcade game has the Peter Gunn theme playing in the background when you start off. And I remember, I think it was the year after this game was released, so it was in 1986, that the Art of Noise covered that same music, the theme from Peter Gunn, with Dwayne Eddy. I think was on guitar. There's a really cool, good guitar riff. If you haven't heard it, go and seek it out and listen to it. And I remember buying that single just so I could play it while I was playing this game. And it's funny, a few years later, I played the arcade game and realised that the music, that really good music that I'd been listening to over and over again while playing the game, didn't last for very long when you started playing the arcade game. But the arcade game's still really good. The control in the arcade game's quite good. The Spectrum game is obviously simpler. The graphics are going to be simpler. There isn't the music that you got in the game. It has quite an unusual mechanic because you can either play in expert or novice mode. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure what expert mode does because I've only ever played this game in novice mode. And what novice mode gives you is a timer when you start, and this countdown just goes down, and you can be killed as many times as you like while you're starting off with this timer. Now, there are a number of different baddies in this game. There's a car that's cyan that you can't actually shoot, it must be armoured, so you've got to ram off the roads. There are the green cars that come later on that can shoot you, and there are red cars which have the old spinning hubcaps which can shred your tyres. So if you bang into the red cars, your car just goes spinning off the road. The other thing there is in this game is good guys. So there are members of the public just quietly making their way along the road in vans and on motorcycles, and if you hit them off the road, you get a penalty. Your score actually goes down, which is slightly unusual. And I guess this game kind of spans genres. It's both a top-down or vertical shooter and a top-down racing game, and I can't really think of any other game that spans those two genres for the Spectrum anyway. There might have been a Road Rash or something like that clone for the Spectrum, or actual conversion of the arcade game. Another really good part of this game is that after a certain amount of time driving, if you slow down, a van will come along with an additional weapon. You can have rockets that you use to shoot the helicopter that attacks you on certain sections of the game. You can have smoke screen or oil slick that you spew out of the back of your car and will then kill any enemies that are behind you. The final play mechanic is that as you travel up the road, occasionally you'll see a sign saying bridge out, and you have to take a fork to the left, which then has your car going through a boathouse and converting into a boat. It seems instantaneous in the game and is quite cool. You're then driving up a river in your boat, avoiding enemies that are throwing barrels or some such thing out behind them to hit you and the enemies themselves. And throughout the entire game, if you ever hit the side of the road or the side of the river, then you die instantly. So it's quite a difficult game. Now, I never liked the boat section as much as I liked the car driving section, and in particular, if I had quite a few weapons and the boat section came along, then what I'd actually do if I was on novice mode and the countdown was still going on is just die, and then you respawn past the broken bridge so you didn't have to actually become a boat. Now, I've seen or read a number of reviews of this game that have said it's got a James Bond feel to it, but I always felt that the guy on the cover looked a bit too young to be James Bond. What I do think the game is very reminiscent of is a lot of those action movies that you got in the 80s, things like Mad Max, which of course, a game where you're travelling up a road and hitting enemies and killing them. There's always going to be comparisons between that and the Mad Max movies. But even without those comparisons, this was an absolutely fantastic game. I used to love trying to get every single one of the weapons, then just seeing how long I could keep them. Because even in novice mode, if you die, you lose all your weapons, and the amount of times I must have died and lost the rocket that you need to shoot the helicopter just before I get to the helicopter section, I think is uncountable. But as with all of the games on this list, I just kept coming back for more and more and more, because this was a really good game. I guess at the start of this list, when I was talking about Slapfight, I said I didn't think there'd be a lot of shoot 'em ups on this list, but what I think I'm realising is there were some games I didn't consider pure shoot 'em ups, such as this, that actually I really enjoyed, and while I might not be the biggest shoot 'em up fan in the world, they tend to be a lot of fun. This game was definitely a lot of fun, so that's why I like it. So that's my number 94 game, Spy Hunter. My number 93 game is Everyone's a Wally. Everyone's a Walle was released by Microgen in 1985 and is of course the follow-up to Pyjama Armor, which was the follow-up to Automania. So Everyone's a Walle is the third Walle Week game. Gameplay is very similar to Pyjama Armor in that you've got to wander around and collect objects and use them to complete tasks or get other objects. However, where it differs from Pyjama Armor is that this time you're not just in control of Walle Week, you're in control of a number of characters. There's Walle himself, his wife Wilma, Tom, who's a mechanic, Dick, who's a plumber, and Harry, who's an electrician. And you can swap between these characters using the 1 to 5 keys, but only if the character you want to swap to is on the same screen as you. While you're not in control of a character, they wander around and will actually sometimes pick up some of the objects that you need. Now, I must admit, most of the time this can hinder you, but some of the times it can actually help you. You can switch to a character and they can already have found one of the objects that you want. This has happened to me once or twice while playing this game. And I seem to remember that to complete the game you've got to get some letters and open a safe, open the bank safe, so that you can pay all the gang their wages. Another unusual thing about this game was that it had a song on the B-side. So the cassette the game came on had the game on one side and a song on the B-side. I can't remember who it was sung by, and I don't think it was that good, but it was something a bit different. Now, I was a huge fan of Pyjama Armor, absolutely loved the game, and as my regular viewers will see, I've completed the game and I've recorded a walkover of me completing the game. In fact, it was the first game I completed a commentary for. And when this game came out, I think I was one of the first people in the queue to buy it, and I really liked the different mechanic where you had to switch between the different characters. Now, what I'll fully admit is that with Pyjama Armor, I actually worked out very, very little of the game myself. I waited for the solution to be printed in Crash and actually used that. So I went through the Crash solution, and in fact, somebody pointed out that for Pyjama Armor, my solution was obviously the Crash one because I'd got an object that I don't think you need to. I don't think you need to get the plant pot to stop the Venus flytraps from killing you. You just need a full bucket of water, and yet I said in my walkover that that's how I do it, and you needed to do that. Whereas for this game, I actually worked out a lot of it myself. I could get nearly all of the letters. I did need to get the solution out of Crash Magazine so I could complete the game, but I did work out quite a bit of myself and really enjoyed it. I like this game. It really doesn't feature that highly in my top 100 list, mostly because I think Pyjama Armor was really the definitive arcade adventure for me, certainly of this kind, of the Walle Week kind, and I never really played or liked any of the others. This, I think, took the genre as far as it could. I liked the mechanic where you change between characters, and actually I was a bit disappointed, I think, when Herbert's Dummy Run came out and subsequent games in the series that you couldn't actually do that anymore. This game was a lot of fun and I spent a lot of time playing it. One thing I do remember about this game that was different to Pyjama Armor was the map was a lot more accessible. There was a lot of Pyjama Armor where you needed to get a particular item or do something before you could get to a certain area of the map, and you don't have that in this game. The map can get a little confusing. There's an enter key so that you can enter various shops and buildings that are around the town that you're walking around, and you can also enter other streets, but that makes the map quite confusing. It takes a little bit of time to get used to and a little bit of time to work out where you're going and how to get around, but once you have, the game becomes a lot easier. So that's my number 93 game, Everyone's a Walle. My number 92 game is Split Personalities. Now, for reasons that I'm sure will become apparent to quite a few of you, if not all of you, I'm not going to say a lot about Split Personalities, when it was released or the gameplay or anything like that. What I will say is that when this game was released, it was something really new and fresh. The kind of spatial puzzler game genre that I'd put this game into was pretty much unknown at the time. When I first played this game, for example, I'd never played Tetris, and I certainly hadn't played anything like Bejeweled or Dr. Mario or anything like that. So this was my first experience of those kind of games where you've got to move shapes around a playing area to solve a puzzle. And in particular, something else that's quite peculiar to this genre is that you have to move shapes around a playing area to solve a puzzle under a time limit. Now that adds another dimension to this kind of game because you've got that time limit. If you think about it in Tetris, it's because the shapes are constantly falling, so you've got to get the shapes into the right position. With this, it's just a timer. But that timer starts to make things tough. Things start to get difficult as you go through the game and as the game progresses and the time limit gets a bit harder. It does start to get more and more difficult. And that kind of need for a combination combination of thinking through the puzzle, and dexterity as well, being able to get the pieces into the right place within the time limit so quickly adds another dimension to this. It's kind of, you constantly feel like you're under pressure. And that just makes for a terrific set of games. Everyone knows how popular Tetris is. I don't think this is up to Tetris's standards, but it is an absolutely terrific game and really, really addictive. You play this game and when you die, you just go back and play again. So that's my number 92 game, Split Personalities. My number 91 game, and the last game in this list, is Wizard's Lair. Wizard's Lair was released in 1985 by Bubble Bus Software and written by Stephen Crow. Now, those of you who are regular viewers will know that I really like Stephen Crow's game Starquake. Starquake's a fantastic game, and this was the game he released before Starquake. Now, in my walkthrough of Starquake, when I talk about Starquake, I will often say that Starquake is probably the best game that looks like an Ultimate Play the Game game that isn't by Ultimate Play the Game. And in some ways, I often feel that Wizard's Lair was almost a test of that. Stephen Crow was writing to that Ultimate Play the Game genre and testing it out and not quite perfecting it with Wizard's Lair before he went on to do Starquake. Now, this game was quite rightly labelled as a Attic Attack clone when it first came out, and I think that's right. But when you play it, not only has it got similarities to Attic Attack, but I think it's also got similarities to Saberwolf. It's a bit more of a maze, and the feel for me is somewhere between Attic Attack and Saberwolf. And while it's a really, really good game, I think there are a few flaws in that. Sometimes things happen in the game that you think, oh no, that was a bit unfair. One of the things I've said about Starquake is sometimes you can die and it feels a bit unfair. There's some of the baddies that just kill you instantly, that just materialise on top of you. And that could also happen in this game. There's two of the baddies. There's the kind of knights with swords, and there's the kind of almost grim reapers with the scythes that will kill you instantly in this game. Sometimes that can feel a bit unfair. But it's still a really good game. It's really, really fun and plays really, really quickly. There are some of the rooms that look a bit like the dungeon rooms in Attic Attack that take a really long time to draw when you first go in them. I think they must have been drawn kind of line by line. But other than that, the game whizzes along at quite a significant pace. Another thing that can feel unfair about this game is that sometimes you can trap yourself or just get stuck. So you use keys and I think rings as well that you have to collect to get through doors, and some of those doors you need to use a key to get through both sides of it. And if you only have one key and you go into an area which is quite small and there aren't any keys available within that area, you've basically locked yourself into the area and there's nothing to do but wait until your energy runs down and all your lives run out. Now, those people who are my regular listeners will know that I don't like games that feel unfair. I always kind of rate them a bit slightly lower than games that I think don't feel unfair. So I think the definition of a game that isn't unfair is whenever you die you feel like it's your fault and not the game's fault. But that's just a small gripe, but I do think it's the reason why this game's down at number 91 and not a lot higher. Now, I remember way back in the day when I bought this game, it was really, really cheap. I think on World of Spectrum it's down as original price something like $6.99, but I'm sure I bought it for either $3.99 or $4.99. It was definitely less than a fiver. I remember going into a shop and I'd read Crash and seen that it was a Crash Smash and seeing it on the shelf and labelled really, really cheaply and thinking, wow, that's brilliant value. I've got that much money in my pocket, I'll buy it. And of course, Stephen Crow did then go on to make one of my all-time favourite games, which is Starquake. So I've got to give him kudos and this game kudos for that. Now, the story behind this is that to complete the game, you've got to find the 4 pieces of the golden lion, which will get you out of the Wizard's Lair, and then find the way out of the Wizard's Lair. And I have to admit, I've never completed it. I had this game. I did play it a lot. I played it quite a bit back in the day, but for some reason, it never really clicked with me, and it's probably what I've said, that sometimes it just felt a little bit unfair, and I never really got on with it, which is a disappointment in a way. I'm thinking I'd like to go back. So one day, I do have a long list of games that I'm going to complete, and actually have a bit of a backlog of games that I need to record commentaries that I have already completed. But you never know, one day in the future you might see a walkthrough of this game with commentary and I might actually complete it. If I do, it'll probably be the first time I've ever done it. So that's my number 91 game, Wizard's Lair. So let's have a countdown of numbers 100 to 91. 100 is Slapfight, 99 is Hypersports, 98 is World Series Baseball, 97 Lord of the Rings, 96 Nightmare, 95, The Pyramid, 94, Spy Hunter, 93, Everyone's a Walle, 92, Split Personalities, and number 91, Wizard's Lair. The next video will be numbers 90 to 81, and until then, happy gaming!